Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our webinar. We'll get started into this conversation as a bit of an introduction into the Secure Agility series that we're running, the Cloud Insight series. We really look to answer some of the questions that we get as we're engaging with customers on their cloud journeys, whether that be things across security, networking, even from the perspective of cloud optimization and things like cost optimization, which actually is about our topic today. So one of the questions we've been getting asked, and what we wanted to explore today was really this topic of, am I overspending in cloud? Now, organizations have made a significant move and shift into cloud, and we'll talk through some of those elements today, but also explore a little bit about how that isn't a yes or no question, and what it actually means to, I guess, optimally assess what is cloud performance, and certainly with Cisco, how we can use things like AI Ops and Cisco Insight to really unpack that. I'm actually joined by our star today, Mark Spoil from Cisco. Mark, thank you for making some time to explore this topic today and for preparing this presentation. How are you?
Oh, great, Soren. Thanks for that very kind introduction there. That's great.
One of the things I like to do at the beginning of these is do a bit of a personal chat here, Mark. I mean, one of the things here we see Cloud and Insight lead at Cisco. What does a day look like for a Cloud and Insight lead at Cisco?
Oh, well, look, it's actually quite interesting because there's a range of different customers that go, I didn't know you did that. So we've got that type of conversation to apps aren't working, bills are too expensive, I can't manage this Cisco and non-Cisco stuff. What do I do? So it's quite varied, and it's all software, so we can get stuff up and running in the afternoon to show customers some of that value.
Yeah, awesome. And just at a personal note, I mean, how did you get your start in the tech industry? We all have our different journeys into why we're here and how we made a start into the tech industry. Where did you begin?
Oh, look, I was in uni doing computing, and then I got into an IT job for a company that sold medical equipment and medical software, and that started part-time job, full-time uni, and then full-time job, part-time uni, and then full-time job, no-time uni. So it went from there and moved me around a few different places. So yeah, I suppose you're doing that training to get the job. I suppose I got the job before finishing that training. So.
Oh, very good,
Very good. A university degree in my resume.
Yeah, we all have a different path into tech, but it's certainly an expanding landscape, and we find our different specializations as well, whether it be cloud or software or apps and bits and pieces. So, look, let's start into the conversation today. Before we get into this, I guess, am I overspending in cloud? One of the things that we really wanted to cover off with just how complex the environment is now, and when we say cloud, I mean that can mean so many different things. There's so many different subscription services and bits and pieces that we purchase. And I just think about my own journey in technology, 17 years working in this space. There's a number of terms here that didn't exist when I started, and probably in the past 5 years have popped up as well. You obviously deal with a lot of different customers, Mark. What are you seeing out there in terms of those common challenges? We've got a couple of points here, but what are those sort of common challenges that customers are having in cloud? And I guess that'll pull it into context in terms of spend as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of opaqueness between what my app needs and what I give my app. And if I have a problem, there's a huge haystack, but that haystack's not in one location anymore. It's in a range of different locations, a range of different geographies, maybe even a range of different stakeholders for those stacks. And then the other key thing is I see all those parts that become part of my application, but how do I relate that to a cost of goods, or how do I relate that to a cost of income? And until I get those monthly MasterCard bills, it becomes really expensive to understand where that cost is and how that cost affects those solutions. But at the end of the day, it's about performance applications and what that works on. And look, if you just go to somewhere like AWS, between the compute resources of EC2 and the storage resources of S3, there's 1.3 million different combinations that you could select for an application. And so it's just becoming outside of a bit of a human scale issue, trying to work out what is good for that application that day, because that application changes every Thursday, because I'm now delivering a DevOps type of solution in my organization.
Yeah, and having, I guess this is to that topic point of am I overspending? I mean, having visibility of the different connections between all of these new systems is a challenge unto itself, let alone understanding performance issues and then from there looking at cost optimization. But I just look at this and think businesses are now faced with such a huge complexity of choice in terms of what cloud computing gives that the problem is becoming order of magnitude larger as we go on and adopt these new
Mm.
technologies. Um, it is a really interesting space, but I mean the question I have, and this is always an interesting one as well, is I mean, in your opinion, what's really been the greatest driver, and I guess still driving cloud adoption for organisations?
I mean, the agility and the availability of resources to an organization is huge. I mean, it's that ability to go and grab something, grab some new tools, grab some new ways of doing things, and then putting it
Mm,
in a place which started as a sand pit and now it's in production, allowing
mm,
customers to do that. The I think the real key thing is it's a way of delivering a service rather than delivering a VM or a server or a chunk of infrastructure. So delivering it as a service has been the biggest change, and
mm.
and delivering that as whether it's a public cloud, private cloud, managed service. I think that's been a big change in the way that people are consuming IT and their applications.
Yeah, and I remember, I mean, back a while ago now, Office 365 and businesses transitioning just simple services like email out to the cloud, and now all infrastructure is code. There's just a number of different components that's sort of gone on that journey. It's one part, I guess, enablement or empowerment of the organisation to adapt. Digital transformation is a big part of that, but also just in that idea of owning assets to then subscribing and consuming has been a big shift for organisations as well. It's actually quite interesting because I did a bit of a poll on LinkedIn, and I thought, given this is a conversation about am I overspending in cloud, I thought, well, I might actually go out and ask a group of the CFOs, Chief Financial Network on LinkedIn, what the most important cloud topic was for CFOs, and I actually found this quite an interesting result because here we're seeing that the categories of enabling business agility, cost optimization, risk mitigation, and visibility of spend. I have to admit, I was a little bit surprised in that. What do you think that's really telling us in terms of, I guess, an organisation's cash flow and where they're looking to invest? What does that really sort of point to in your mind from those results?
Yeah, look, I think, I mean, obviously cost optimization there is, you think that would be a natural CFO type objective, but
Mm,
they're probably looking at it from the other side of opportunity costs. So if I don't do this, what are the revenue, what is the revenue and the outcome and the gains that my business or my organization is missing out on if
mm.
I'm not doing that? And I think that's really changing a different thing. I mean, there was also a poll on, who's driving your digital transformation strategy? Is it your CEO, CFO, COO, or
Yeah.
COVID? And I think that what we've done in the last 2 years is really help people understand where they can get these services from.
Yeah, it is interesting as well, and I think what's also, I guess, an interesting thing for me, a thought topic I got from this was um, the job of managing that spend and that variable cost. It hasn't gone away; it's actually just moved. So, from the perspective of IT teams now, or infra ops, they're now being asked to look at these sorts of things in new ways, and really, I guess, have the tool sets and bits and pieces to be able to assess, well, am I in over investing in these areas, or have we got an optimal spend level there as well? So I don't think those things go away. I think it just sort of shifts. But the interesting one here is visibility of current spend was not a key point, which I find interesting in that scenario because
Mm.
that for me is really working out that cost performance to what the investment looks like. So that job hasn't gone away. Maybe it's just shifted from the CFO.
Yeah, definitely. And I think um, there's a forward investment view at this part of not only our business cycle in the year, but obviously as people get back into this hybrid workspace, where
Mm.
do I have to reinvest in my business and in my customers?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So look, I guess it's been an interesting few years for organisations as we've adopted and adapted these into this new way of working. Obviously, a lot of remote work through the pandemic. But what I wanted to talk through is just some of the insights out there in terms of the different cloud options that exist. Because when we're looking at, am I overspending in cloud? Well, there's different areas of what cloud can be. One of the interesting stats here, not to run through all of them, but one of the interesting stats here is the IaaS market up by nearly 40%. So that's consuming public cloud services, whether that be Amazon, Microsoft, Google here as well. That's a significant increase in organizations shifting out to the cloud. What do you sort of see in terms of businesses' cloud strategy? And is public cloud really that first and foremost that businesses are going with?
Oh, look, definitely. I think whether it's a dev environment or where it's a full production environment, there's definitely a cloud first, cloud native push. But I think what we're seeing is that that pendulum swing back to what type of cloud. It doesn't necessarily need to be public cloud, but maybe that ends up in public cloud first. And then I'm seeing a lot more of the conversations around multi-cloud, so using multiple public clouds because I get access to different capabilities. And then there's hybrid cloud where because of the cost of cloud and because of the range of different sort of technology or risks that I might have in the cloud, I'll have a lot of solutions that are on-prem or in a managed environment, but connect to cloud for other parts of that and make sure I stitch that together. The other key thing is edge. So how do I get my power users or my retail shop or my data sets to the people that really need them? How do I get those to the right people at the right time without some of those latency issues that we see? So hybrid cloud is really driving a lot of our conversations through that at the moment.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I guess when we talk about private cloud, we run our own private cloud here at Secure Agility, very specifically around things like security and GovCloud and those sorts of things as well. So I think each has its place, but ultimately it adds more complexity for management. So that back to that topic of am I overspending in cloud? Well, we need to actually unpack where do workloads sit? What's the most optimal way of doing that? And I think businesses are starting on that journey. It's not necessarily integrated into their cloud strategy just yet.
And I think a lot of the solutions have been, hey, this is my solution. I can fit your business into my solution. Give me your apps and I'll fit them in. As I said, there are 1.3 million different options here. So hopefully something that suits. But what we really need to do is focus on a business and their applications and their data. So what do the applications need to run? What are the dependencies? Are there sort of advantages or limitations we can add to those dependencies? Where's the data going to be placed? How is it going to be secured? Who's going to have access to it? And then once I understand that, the rest is easy. So maybe that's a hybrid solution, maybe that's a public cloud solution, maybe it's a combination of the two. But what we've got to stop doing is saying my solution is best for you. Let's try and push something into a square hole with a round block, rather than just understanding what I need first and then providing that. Being software, it's a lot easier for us to define a lot of those things today.
Yeah, absolutely. And mapping those dependencies is a big thing that we'll talk about a little bit later of why that's important to understand where things should sit. So I guess this is an interesting one. I always like to draw a bit of a timeline, I guess, back to, how did we get here and what has been that journey? And for me, I sort of observed that it was around about, 2010 when bandwidth became more available or more accessible. So the barrier was lower to start pushing these workloads out. And what organizations I've observed have really done there is the cloud and SaaS subscription costs have been growing exponentially over that time as we start to consume more services rather than working in that asset, that asset base that we leverage. The next part is that we probably observed a bit of a dip because we were pushing all these workloads out in terms of the IT assets we were managing. But now with mobile devices, all of these new things that exist within the business, we've got more assets to manage and more variable costs. You talk a little bit about the performance expectation growing along in that sense, and that's sort of touching on that, application need and application performance to cost. Talk us through your thinking there about, how those nexuses come together.
Yeah, I think, once I have an IT asset, I have a fixed cost. It's very easy for me to do continual performance improvement around that. But when I move it into something that is a very disparate or distributed cost and have all these different variables, as I add more services or as I add more complexity, my costs go up. So my ability to absorb best, continuous improvement of best practice I just had this opaque way of how that's delivering me extra value. Whereas
Mm.
when I have some sort of IT asset type of mentality, I can see how that's directly offering me better value to those costs. And so
Yeah.
when we have a more structured what is required for my application rather than what's required for my infrastructure or my services, then it makes it very easy to see where those costs are going and then where I can do continuous improvement.
Yeah, and it certainly, I mean, even in our personal lives, you look at the number of subscriptions that we have, and then you times that by the order of magnitude in business, all the different apps coming together to perform that outcome. Compound that with digital transformation and the idea that organizations post-COVID, most services will remain digital, moving through there. The problem's only getting larger, and I think we're starting to see businesses when they're looking at those hybrid models of saying, like you said, is it better for me to own that asset and get cost performance from it rather than just subscribing to these types of services?
And look, the base cost of cloud is I'm going to pay on consumption, but what we
Mm.
end up doing is actually paying on allocation. So it's easy to over allocate as an IT asset because it's there. It's a fixed cost. It's already landed. There's no expansion because I'm just using software. But when I
Mm.
do it in cloud and I over provision something that doesn't require it, I'm back to that. Here's a large VM, but I'm using 2%. I'm not paying 2% what I'm consuming. I'm paying the 100% that I've allocated. And
Yeah.
so that's just a self-defeating prophecy as we go forward because we just continue to over allocate because we don't understand the applications, we don't understand the data, and we throw
Mm.
more resources at something that doesn't give us any return.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that really, if you look at where that falls within an organization, I mean, I love this graphic because it does sort of show down the bottom here all of the complexity that we're now managing in infra ops, and then management and the business units trying to interface with that technology to deliver their outcomes as well. The interesting thing here, though, is whether you're a business that's of enterprise scale or whether you're a small business, there's still someone, a partner or a team, or potentially you're on a maturity journey to work out how do we consume these services from different providers and bits and pieces. But ultimately, all of that information then needs to flow through the humans that are managing that system. Right now, IT ops are always under pressure here, Mark. But what sort of commentary do you see out there with teams? What are they really struggling with when it comes to, I guess, managing all of this technology?
Yeah, look, I mean, all these units that we have in front of us all have the IP or their responsibility that they need to do around an application or
Mm.
an organization or a business outcome. But the problem with all the things that they've got to touch today is just becoming outside of human scale. But if I
Mm.
can capture their IP, if I can capture what they need around governance and security and application requirements, I can automate this so that I can help people do these things rather than being the gateway or the person that has to do thousands of trouble tickets every month to try and just keep up with the day-to-day running of the business.
Yeah, and then obviously when we look at this graphic here, we're looking at security, network, apps all coming in together to try and get that outcome, but they're all competing priorities and can often trip over themselves in terms of is security going to stop us from achieving this outcome, or do we have enough network bandwidth to be able to perform this function? So it all sort of needs to come together. So from an infra ops perspective, I mean, we sort of spoke through this. If we use the analogy of a human doing all of that function, it is beyond human scale to really manage all of these things adequately. What do infra ops really need, or the infrastructure teams really need these days?
Oh, I think we just need to capture the best practice of what they want as their outcome, and then let the AI build that. So an AI system is not going to build you all this IP about making your business, but it's going to help you capture that IP and then implement that and make sure that that's done to a high level of governance and a high level of security. And
Yeah.
so we know that some of these tasks are handed out uh, to staff that there's human mistakes. There's probably not the consistency, or I've learned a best practice on how to roll this out, but I've got three other I've got 3 years worth of systems that need to be updated to do the same thing.
Mm.
Using something like Cisco Intersight allows us to capture that IP and then continually have that business improvement as part
Mm.
of how we go forward. And more importantly, do it for the application requirements and dependencies, not for the infrastructure. That's the
Yeah.
key. That's the key tenet we've got to change.
Yeah. And also, just as we were talking about earlier, mapping or just as it says here, comprehensive research of the infrastructure and workloads, just mapping all of that out and the dependencies across all of that is a job unto itself, let alone then looking at how do we optimize the spend of that. So I guess, how does Intersight really solve that challenge for businesses?
It looks at it from an application point of view and gives you the mapping of that, that car rental app or that business app or that facilities management app, all the way down through all the different software layers, right down to the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so you can see what changes or what things need to be optimized or updated to factor that in. And the best part about that is that that's giving you the information today on how it's running. And then if I want to do a cloud migration, if I want to migrate to different areas, it knows exactly what that application needs. So rather than a fast fail and maybe I have a problem and I've got to call it back into a system, I can actually show you what's happening. And because we're collecting that data, we can then start making an analysis on what that application is going to need over the next 3 or 6 months. So we can not only show what costs are directly related to a service, but then what will that service need over the next 3 or 6 months to give predictability to those costs and understand where there's business improvement.
Yeah, and that's really back to that, the core topic of today, which is, we're moving quickly through it to make sure we meet our half an hour. But the point here is, am I overspending in cloud? Well, we need to understand what you're consuming first. What's the performance, or what's the objective of what you're trying to achieve from a performance layer, and how those things are connected, and then be able to understand where do I best put those workloads. That's very difficult for an infrastructure team to do without good tools. And one of the things we saw here was intelligent automation for real-time balancing of risk, cost, and control. Intersight has a product, workload optimizer. How does that product really work in that context?
Yeah, so it understands those requirements, and then whether it's a virtualization, VMware Hyper-V, whether it's public cloud, Amazon Azure, goes and changes the requirements for that application to be consistent. I mean, I can solve cloud costs tomorrow by making everything an A1 microservice. We just know that the applications won't work. So let's find that out, because the only way that we find that out is to do that. I'll do something until it fails without any understanding the application dependencies, and push that out as a change. Now we can now say this is what is required from the application, and because I get that visibility, I create those insights, but then I automate or make it automatic that we implement those insights so that I get that value, rather than giving you a list of things to do, 1,000 trouble tickets to go and maintain. I want to get business staff working on business problems, not trying to fix infrastructure. And I want to get these systems automated so they're continuous improvement, rather than creating trouble tickets for things to do when all people do is just click on the red button and move on to their next task rather than actually implement it.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, where the greatest opportunity is here, is to use these tools not only to manage performance, but also look at, well, what are we spending, where are we spending, why are we spending, and how does that help the infra team make and ops teams make better and more informed decisions.
Definitely.
So one of the common things that we sort of get is, I've had a few conversations with customers about potentially leveraging this type of tool set to help them. One of the common things is, why can't I just use Azure Resource Manager? I already have tools, or I have spreadsheets to manage this. What's your commentary around how Intersight, I guess, adds more value across the native tools that exist within some of these clouds?
Yeah, I think that the two things is, when we look at most of the, I'm going to use some cloud optimization tools, or I'm going to use some cloud spend tools. It really looks at what's happening within the VM, or that instance, or that container, or that particular service. It doesn't understand the application, and it doesn't understand the application requirements. So once I do that and map out those dependencies, I can see that if I make a change to this VM here, it's going to affect the performance of this service, or this web front end, or this finance database at the back end. And so, as you can see here, I can go and get a broader picture rather than just a VM, and then understand that application dependency and deliver that. Now, that could be read only. Here's what you need to do, or it could be fully automated, where I've understood your application and now I'm going to implement those changes for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we just look at this, the platform's now in scope for IT ops. I mean, this is just a subset, I guess, of the true magnitude of everything that's there. But as you're saying, correlating the information across all of these different platforms, I think that's a huge power of Intersight to be able to look at that and then make informed or intelligent recommendations. And in some instances, you were talking about the decision automation as well that comes within Intersight. So being able to make, I guess, workflow created to be able to approve the tool to optimize itself. How does that sort of work?
Yeah, definitely. So rather than process automation where if these conditions happen, these are my answers for them. It's actually, because it's SaaS delivered, it's a continuous improvement cycle. So as we learn new ways of doing things and we collect that data, we can then create an insight to say these are the things that we need to carry as an action, and these are the expected results. And as I said, you can press the go button to get it done automatically, or you can carry out those actions one by one. But the important thing there is it understands that there's costs not just in the infrastructure or the public cloud, but what does your SQL licensing look like? What can we do around extra nodes that we don't need? When do we start using reserve instances to save some costs? So those are the type of things we can do there.
Yeah, I mean, I think this slide, I like the graphic here because it sort of shows over on the left a bit of the dependencies that Intersight's mapping to then make those types of recommendations. We look at the workload optimizer here, so simplifying it through AI ops, looking at reducing OPEX and preserving capital. What's an example, I guess, where you've seen this work really well, or a couple of examples where you've seen this work really well for a customer who might be interested in trying to work out, well, what are we spending and are we overspending in cloud?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you think about how we implement some systems sometimes is we implement them, we get the project done, it's completed, and then we move on to something until it catches fire. And then we come back in a reactive state to try and fix it. This is actually telling me in steps before the users ring, before trouble tickets are created, to say, these are the things that need more resources. These are the things that have been over provisioned and undescribed. And these are things that I need adjustments like heap sizes to get through. But probably the key things is I've got a great example of Penske Australia and a case study on our website where they purchased a system pre-COVID, set up for their ERP and their main systems, and then basically within a week they had to move a workforce of 300 people to home and use VDI and other systems to connect to that. Yeah. Workload Optimizer went through and reconfigured basically the virtualization infrastructure and some of their cloud infrastructure to work more to that remote workspace that they needed. Now that they've come back to the office, and now they're in a bit of a hybrid mode. I don't think we'll ever get rid of remote work, but I mean, nor should we. It's now reconfiguring to be more of an ERP system. So rather than putting a whole heap of people in a reactive state, it got proactive and understood what the system needed to be configured for. There's just a recent one with a public service customer, public sector customer, who after a migration to Azure was getting $300,000 a month bills, and they could basically buy their data center requirements 3 times over each year based on that bill. By using Workload Optimizer, we saw that there was an immediate $80,000 a month saving. They had an ROI of 3 weeks from that purchase, and now we're going through, because we understand their application dependencies, going through that. They were using Azure Resource Manager. They tried some other tools which fiddle a little bit around the edge, but we show them all this disconnected storage. We show these over provision applications, because you probably had them with huge VMs internally, which didn't cost you anything because I had a landed cost. Move that to cloud, and I get stuck with this. I'm paying on allocation, not consumption basis. So we help them with that. Yeah. Hard to do with just a couple of hundred VMs. Try with that customer who've got a couple of thousand VMs. Just as the human capital tried to get that done is huge.
Yeah, and I think the value here on a sort of a full stack observability. We're going to do another webinar about that specifically and how this fits into, I guess, Cisco stack with AppD and Thousand Eyes as well. But the value there for customers is obviously being able to generate an ROI from using the tool to optimize where they are today, but then also to optimize application performance moving forward. Look, Mark, that's awesome, mate. I know we're coming up to time here for the webinar. So one of the things that we wanted to do is obviously implementing these tools and getting access to these tools takes time. But what we're looking for from a secure agility perspective is really for 5 organizations to come on a bit of a cloud and application optimization journey using these tool sets. We've got the support of our internal teams and the support of Cisco as well to work with some business to really prove out that value of that. So if that's of interest of anyone who's attended the webinar today, please reach out. We can't do more than 5 organizations, but we would certainly like to help businesses understand how you can leverage these tool sets and really look at, am I overspending in cloud, or how does that application performance versus cost actually marry up today? So thank you so much, Mark, for taking us through that today. Really appreciate you taking the time as well to prepare this presentation.
Thanks, Soren, anytime, and thanks everyone for joining. Hope you're keeping safe and you're getting out and about a bit more. But please don't hesitate to contact either of us if you have any questions.
Awesome. Well, look, in terms of our next webinar in the Cloud Insight series, our next webinar is on the 15th of December, and we're looking at ISO 27001 as a best practice security, information security framework. So certainly come along to that if you're interested in understanding how that can be applied to avoid some of those cyber risks and also raise your maturity. Thanks again, Mark, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, team.